If you want to hear about the situation with Wikipedia, biotacast, or one word, .org. I restarted the Biota podcast recently, and a majority of the recordings have featured the Wikipedia stuff, but I don't want to record a long funk about Wikipedia. I started recording a couple, maybe 3 even long funks about Wikipedia. It's a waste of time. biotacast.org. Check out that podcast. Interesting restarting a podcast. I'm having this strange experience of reaching out to people who I consider in some regard old friends, but also, in the process, reaching out to other people and either getting no response or, more curiously, getting a response which is just reminding me that while I have moved on over the past, 7 years since the Biota recordings were in place, the perception of me by a group of people, I guess, remains the same, which is very curious, you know? It's a bit like when I returned to Australia, had various family members that had just not moved on. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about tonight is associated with the things that I've been doing other than the Wikipedia nonsense. One of the things that I've been doing a lot of recently is working on Noble Ape. The requirement is a web server and a client by June 13th. I'm getting pretty close. I think it's doable. The client components, the actual connection parts, just basically the Noble Ape simulation. I'm rewriting the Objective-C portion in Swift to make it slightly more interesting to a group of users, but it's coming together. I think it'll be there by June 13th. In parallel to this, when I get too sick of this kind of stuff, I've got maybe 8 pieces of music that I'll put out in another musical release. Probably not on June 15th, but probably in the time frame maybe before I go to the UK. It's always nice to have something on the electronic device, some of your own music to listen to occasionally, particularly when you're spending long periods of time on the tube or these kind of things. But the topic that I wanted to talk about this evening relates to the other thing that I've been doing, which is listening to a lot of audiobooks. I'm getting to a point where I think potentially I have 2, maybe 3 bits of sustained writing that could translate very easily to audiobooks. One of them, I'm experimenting with actually performing as an audiobook and seeing if the writing can come from that. There are various services which I've used historically to transcribe podcasts. And my thought is once I get to a level of performance that I'm satisfied with in audio form, then I will just get it transcribed into a book and formalize the audiobook recording after the fact with at least one of these pieces of writing. The other 2 pieces of writing I might do more traditionally. Well, one I've already done pretty traditionally. And this is an interesting experience because I think the future of this kind of idea creation, this kind of idea propagation, is in audiobook form. The written word, for a majority of things, I just don't think has the gravitas that it once had. And the only way to embrace this is through creating audiobooks. But most of the audiobooks that I listen to are accounts of the Second World War. In fact, my audiobook consumption is about 95% Second World War material. First-person accounts, basically. And I consume this with a veracity that it almost appears to me to be either a subject of depression or a subject of escape or understanding. Now, interestingly, in parallel with this Wikipedia nonsense, Noble Ape is now no longer the primary focus of this other individual. After 2 and a bit years, another comedy tour. He's done a comedy tour in between, but he didn't change his website. So he's now no longer paying people to the extent that he once did associated with this thing. And that has been, if it weren't for the Wikipedia stuff, which has taken up my energy independently, that has been almost, it struck me as really very strange when it happened. I was caught by it, I paused, and I just thought, what on earth has been going on for the past 2+ years of my life with this nonsense, this paid-for nonsense that's just created this toxicity? There's always been the opportunity to walk away. There's always been the opportunity to do a variety of different things. But it's interesting that these Second World War narratives, in particular German narratives of the Eastern Front, of which there's a really finite number. There's not a huge number of these texts out there. these are things that I return to. The notion of dealing with failure, dealing with defeat, dealing with being overrun, these kind of ideas are so important to me currently as just a means of, I don't know, escapist narrative. I'm not really clear what it's about, but I'm starting to wonder if reading or having these audiobooks read to me is creating a psychology which might be ideally suited for providing or creating certain kinds of texts. But it is very curious and very removed from, I think, a majority of the population. Maybe actually this is an acknowledgement that I've moved into this space myself anyway, that the creative process is now something which is fundamentally monastic. But I have broken that down recently. The restart of the Biota podcast enabled me to connect with a gentleman called Anton. I went up to Berkeley and met him last weekend, which was very nice. It's nice to actually meet people that have a degree of existential respect for your prior work. I guess that's what I'm looking for in some sustained sense. The notion of collaboration and communication, all the stuff that I get out of, Bob Mottram, for example, meeting him and talking to him, these kind of things seem to be what I've optimized certain aspects of my life for. And I need to acknowledge that explicitly. The notion of collaboration, the notion of going out and finding the others is still important to me, even though I live a very monastic lifestyle. So when it happens, it is fascinating and interesting and worthy of some degree of study. But in terms of the rewriting of the simulation, in terms of Noble Ape IO, it's all about that. It's all about trying to get the next generation of, bright young things interested in the stuff that I've done historically. And it's really a very strange experience to now reconnect with a bunch of artificial life simulators and see what they have done in the past 7 years, see where they are now, see whether they're still caught in the same kind of paradoxes or whether they've moved things in different directions. I'm not saying I'm a a leader in this regard at all. I've wasted way too much time with nonsense over at least the past 2.5 years. But even looking back on the period of time with Bob Mottram working on the simulation, I could have provided a lot more assistance and support through that period of time as well. The kind of nature of the workaday life, the nature of the kinds of problems that I've encountered over, the past 8 years, that has changed what I would like my ideal response to be. So through this, I am constructing what the next year should look like in a kind of productive, creative sense. I do like the addition of music. I do like the addition of this other thing. I make a little bit of money per month on the music. Once I make about $100 a month, I'm thinking I then go out and start performing music. I think that's the level where I have an audience sufficient. It's a bit like podcast recordings. You do a podcast and, you might have 200 listeners, and then you have some podcasts that have, I don't know, Stone Ape at its peak had thousands of listeners, and Model Rail Radio at its peak had tens, if not hundreds of thousands of listeners, if you believe that. So what that means is that I can go anywhere in the world and meet people that are listeners to Model Rail Radio. And what it meant with regards to Stone Ape was that it had a following within a community, that people were receptive to it. But these things occasionally fall by the wayside. You have to move on. So the music for me is a means of ongoing putting stuff out there in a very specific form. And if I can do the writing in a similar light, if I can maintain Noble Ape in a similar light, all these things are good, Through the recent issue with Wikipedia, I've reflected very heavily that all I want to do is create good work. I have to be at arm's length from this Wikipedia thing, but all I want to do is create good work and enable people to find this work if they are so interested. The ability to have people find the work has been the primary thing that has been under attack over the past 2 and a bit years. But my hope is continuing to produce work will alleviate some of the issues that have occurred over the past 2.5 years. And it's been a learning experience in terms of doubling down. As I listen to these war-related audiobooks, I'm realizing the qualities that I want to see in myself mirrored from these, soldiers being overrun. These somewhat idealistic and somewhat stupid soldiers being overrun. But there's also a very interesting change of narrative with regards to the Second World War, which has really gone on in the past decade. Some scholars on this attribute it to the fall of the Soviet Union and the means of looking at the Soviet Union very critically in terms of genocide and these kind of behaviours. And within that context now, the Soviet Union is no more. There seems to be a very curious rewriting of the Third Reich, which I'm reading and reflecting on where my own particular perspectives come from with regards to this thing. It's a very interesting meta-narrative to be working through, along with many other things currently. So we will see what comes out of this time. We will see what comes out of new narratives. I still feel 4 podcasts is too many, I think. But I feel dedicated to my rules of beta. I feel dedicated to Long Funk. If I ever even considered stopping Model Rail Radio, I would be hunted down. And out of this thing as well has been a return to Biota as a means of talking to old friends that have very similar and curious proclivities with regards to creating these simulations. That is what it is. That is where I find myself.